is over.
Hey, just before we get to the video, I just want to say thank you for coming on, and please consider liking this video if you enjoy it. Comment below if, say, you find something wrong, or you just want to say good job. In any case, please consider subscribing to my channel. And if you're really dedicated as a fan, ring that bell. It'll notify you anytime new videos are up. And I hope you enjoyed this video. Hello and welcome to I Can't Believe It's Not the Mouse, the podcast all about animated features not made by Disney. I'm your host, Octaviano, and today we're going to talk about an animated feature that a lot of you have seen. A lot of you have definitely grown up with it. You definitely grew up with the show if you're around my age. And that is Jimmy Neutron, Boy Genius. For a lot of you, you are definitely aware of this as the show that was on Nickelodeon, and for the most part it's understandable why. It was a pretty clever written show, and for this movie it was an Oscar nominee. In fact, it was one of the first Oscar nominees for Best Animated Feature, as this went up against both Shrek and Monsters, Inc. This one is definitely the weakest one of the bunch. It's the one that I'm like, yeah, in that contest, I know who's going down first. But to be fair, it doesn't mean that it's bad. It is a good choice. Like, even if this had won, I'd be like, you know what, that was fine. I would have preferred the other two, but this was a good, fine choice. It's a well-written, fun little movie that knows exactly how long it needs to be, and it never wears itself out. So, for those of you who are new to the, Jimmy Neutron franchise, Jimmy Neutron is yet another series about a smart kid who has a lab and a bunch of scientific gadgets and all that stuff. It's a lot like Dexter's Laboratory, only the major difference is that whereas Dexter on Dexter's Lab was very secretive of his lab, at least to his parents and the people nearby him anyways, Jimmy was out and about the lab. Like, people knew that he did this stuff. His parents knew, his friends knew. Everyone was well aware of the fact that this kid had a bunch of technology and gadgets. And yeah, that would be the biggest thing that sets this apart. The other thing being is that this one would go more into, being like a sitcom, if that makes sense. Like, it definitely feels more like something that you would see alongside like a classic, 50s sitcom or 60s sitcom, only with like modern jokes and modern, like modern style, so to speak. It's already 20 years old. Wow. Versus Dexter's Lab, which definitely leaned more on the sci-fi stuff. It was very clear that in that show that the creator was leaning a lot more towards stuff that he grew up reading or watching, whether it was old sci-fi shows, superhero stuff, or any of that kind of thing. Jimmy Neutron is definitely one where it's like, yeah, you don't feel that level of geekiness towards it, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily bad. It is clever in its own way, and it still had its own, fun sci-fi episodes. Of course, the movie itself is a big sci-fi story, which, getting into the movie is, oddly enough, not a 90-minute pilot for the show. Like, it essentially kind of is, and I'll get into that in a bit, but it doesn't feel like something that if you were told, like, yes, this was made to introduce a show, it doesn't feel like it, because it does feel like you could have easily seen this movie on its own and then imagining, due to the success, because this was a fairly low budget movie and it did make some money, that they would have been like, okay, let's make a show to tie into it, because that was stuff that they used to do all the time. Still kind of do, really, but it feels like it was much more rampant 20 years ago than it was now. And yeah, like, you get a sense that this could have held on its own without any knowledge of it ever being a show. Basically, like I said, you got the smart kid Jimmy Neutron. He has a nerdy friend named Carl, and another friend who's, a big fan of this superhero character called Ultra Lord named Sheen. They go to school. They're essentially bullied by two popular girls, Cindy and Libby. And then there's the cool kid, Nick. And pretty much where the plot gets going is that Jimmy pretty much starts off by sending this message out into space, and it's like, it's a message that is built into a toaster, which I think is another thing that kind of makes it different from Dexter's Lab, is that sometimes Jimmy's inventions are pretty much just like, I guess you would say, like MacGyvered items. Like, pretty much you would take random household stuff and then turn it into like science equipment. And in this case, he pretty much makes a transmitter that sends out a message to space, basically looking for other life forms, to basically say like, hey, look, we should, if you're smart, aliens, maybe we should all get together and make some kind of like galactic unity federation or whatever. Pretty much, he's trying to send out a message of peace. So he sends that out, and we don't get back to it until a little later, because we start off with him going to school. We see like how his life is like. The parents are, generally speaking, accepting of him being smart, but at the same time, they do want him to be safe. Like, the mother essentially is like, hey, look, don't be flying around rockets, because it's dangerous. The father, Hugh Neutron, which, very popular character. I know he's become a definite meme, amongst a lot of circles, to the point that they're putting him in that Nickelodeon Super Smash Bros. Game as a character just because of the memes. And, fine. I could actually see why. He's a very funny character. He's constantly spouting funny lines, whether it's in the movie or the show, where he's just saying stuff where it's like, yeah, that's definitely, an interesting thing. That's, I don't know, it's great. But, yeah, so you get a sense of his home life, and then, like, the moment where things get changed is where you have the popular character Nick telling the leads to go to this theme park on its opening day, despite it being a school night, which, honestly, that's one of the weird parts of the movie, especially getting older now. I mean, granted, not saying that there's never been a theme park that opens on a school night, but I feel like that's probably a bad decision, right? Like, having this big theme park open on a night where kids can experience it, because, kids are definitely going to be among your major money makers, especially for a kid-centered theme park. But whatever, it's all in the plot. So, the popular kid Nick, pretty much, he's like, yeah, you guys should just sneak out. Your parents aren't going to allow you to, stay out up for this, so who cares? Just sneak out. At first, Jimmy's hesitant on the idea, but then he decides, okay, fine, and we should do that, because his initial bribery fails to work on his mom, and even gets him grounded. So he's like, okay, fine, I'll sneak out. The other two sneak out as well. They have their fun at the theme park, and Carl wishes on a shooting star just so they could have this pretty much this kind of free life forever. Plot twist: here comes that message from earlier in the movie. Actually finding an alien life form, which is these egg yolk villains named the Yokians. Not very clever, but it's a kids movie, and they pretty much are, well, they do what you normally expect from aliens in these kinds of movies. They get the message and they're like, oh, we want to, we don't want to do some peace. We want to get the people in there, specifically the adults, to feed to our god, which is this giant chicken named Poltra. So, weird, but it's funny, it's cute, and that's where pretty much the movie, really kicks off. The Okians come in, they kidnap the parents. The kids aren't aware of this. At first, they think it's like some kind of blessing from Carl's wish, and then it turns out to be a complete nightmare, of course, because without any adults, there's no one to take care of them. So, you have that problem. Jimmy eventually figures out that it's aliens that came in and took their parents, and all the kids set off into space to go and rescue them. From there, you get, little, funny bits. You got the adventures. They encounter their parents being mind controlled by these aliens. The aliens are about to feed them in a ritual to the chicken god. Jimmy defeats the aliens, proves his worth, all that good stuff, and it's none of it is really all that unpredictable, but at the same time, it's just fun and well written and it's charming. There's a lot of great jokes in this, whether it's the Neutron character, the dad, saying a lot of funny stuff, like at one point he mentions, oh yeah, I used to sneak out too, Like, I had to sneak out when I got grounded for my best friend's bachelor party, which I'm like, okay. And then, of course, there's stuff like him explaining why rockets are bad and, trying to give a speech as to why he's grounded. And it's like, you said a whole lot of nothing, and it just boils down to rockets are adult flying things. But yeah, for the most part, it's all that. And, of course, what also makes it hold up is that there's a lot of charm in the voice cast for this. Most of it is just, regular voice actors. Like, there's only really 2 big name stars in this, which is Patrick Stewart as the leader of the evil aliens, and Martin Short, who plays the brother / assistant of the evil aliens. And even then, realistically, if we're completely honest, if this movie were done today, they probably would have been brought in as regular cast members for the show. Maybe not, but, it is fun to see, how times have changed. And in that regard, it's also why this doesn't feel like it's a pilot for the show, because these characters eventually do come out on the show. I do remember they do make reappearances on it, but not voiced by these actors. But on top of that, also, it's much later in the show. Like, I believe by the point that they reappeared, the show had already been on for like 2, maybe 3 years. I could be wrong on that, but I know it was definitely some time between the movie and their reappearance on the show. So that's kind of neat. And realistically, it works because, well, I do enjoy them in this movie. Having them as a constant presence on the show would have negated a lot of the fun and charm that they had in this movie. Speaking of charm, we gotta talk about the animation on this. For the most part, it is not good animation. It is very poorly done. It is bad, even by the standards of its 2001 release. It was not as up to date as Shrek or Monsters Inc. And yeah, you could tell that this was not a high budget movie. That being said, it goes to show you how a good design style choice goes for these movies. Because the movie itself, again, it's not a very well looking high-tech movie. The animation is definitely out of date, even for when it was released. But oddly enough, it does not look horrible to look at. Like, even compared to some of the other stuff that might have been more advanced at the time. I think this holds up a lot better, and that's mostly because it's a very good design style, because a lot of it is very cartoony. Like, this is the kind of stuff that you would imagine seeing like on a 2D short or something. It's not trying to be realistic, which is honestly the biggest downfall with a lot of these things, where they try going so realistic that it just looks very bad. This one, it's like, it clearly doesn't look good for today's standards. It didn't look good in the standards of back then. But because it's not trying to go for a realistic, super detailed look, it results in an art style of the movie that lends itself well to timelessness. It looks cute. The characters look fine. I mean, sometimes they can be kind of lifeless, but for the most part, they never look awful. Like, they never look like nightmares. They never look like something that I'm like, yeah, they gotta redo this movie. And honestly, I wouldn't mind if they redo the movie, update it with modern software. That'd be kind of neat to see. But for what it's worth, on the animation itself, it looks fine. So it's cute in that regard. Honestly, what looks more outdated now than the animation is the music choices in this movie. And not that it has bad music choices. Some of it is fine, some of it not. But it's kind of like, yeah, I could tell that this movie came out 20 years ago, because every now and then you have music randomly popping into the movie. And while some of it does work, it's a bit too random, and it's kind of like, it would not be the same if it was done today. Like, granted, not that movies now don't have soundtracks. It's just that a lot of them, if they do, it's often much older songs instead of something that's current. And they try to be more strategic about it. Not that everyone does, but of course, they try. Like, even, as much as I didn't care for 2016 Suicide Squad, It did have some good music choices in there, most of which was kind of random, and a lot of which didn't fully fit with what they were doing, but at the very least you could see, like, okay, it makes more sense than a lot of the choices that they do here. Like when the kids are fighting back against the aliens, it's like, I mean, that's a decent song, I guess, to go along with it, but it's still weird when you see, well, I guess it would be fine with the theme park one, but I don't know, there's a few different times where the song choices just feels a bit weird to me. And I guess also I really should talk about how this fares against Dexter's Lab, which I personally prefer Dexter's Lab, but if you prefer Jimmy, I totally get it. There is its own charms to it. Again, I just prefer a lot of the geeky stuff that Dexter's Lab had over what Jimmy had. Not that Jimmy was necessarily devoid of this stuff, but, you know, it's not there as often. Realistically, where I kind of tend to falter and switch over to the Dexter side is just that with Jimmy, while it's nice to see the parents being aware of it, it adds, well, it's nice to see that the parents are aware of what he does. It kind of loses a bit of the charm of having the character kind of try to avoid being noticed for what they do. And then the other thing is just that even though I do like the Jimmy character, at times it's like, okay, this character's supposed to be smart, and he technically is because he creates devices, but at the same time he's kind of a brat. And not that Dexter didn't act childish either. I mean, of course, they're both kids. It's just that I just feel like between the two of them, Dexter was more consistent as a character than Jimmy was, where Jimmy at times just feels like, okay, you're making choices that feel a little stupid even for someone who's supposed to be smart. And just doesn't make whole lot of sense. But, you know, it's never to the point that it really ruins it. It's just something that kind of always irritated me a bit. And then there's also that this kind of leans heavily into what was kind of the big thing of a lot of 90s and 2000s cartoons where it was a whole boys versus girls thing. Of course, it still exists, but for the most part, I feel like it was much more common in those eras. So that kind of stuff, I mean, to me, is just always the most generic, annoying, safe stuff. So it's just, I don't care for it. I feel like more people should have really gotten rid of that whole storyline because it just didn't work. Like, the Cindy and Libby characters, I mean, they have their moments, they're fine. It's just that for the most part, I'm left feeling like, I don't care about all this arguing you guys have over, you know, boys, girls, whatever. It's all stupid. Just get on with the other funny stuff. But, you know, that's realistically minor gripes. I don't know. I guess I just feel like just acknowledging it because people will acknowledge it. I feel like, I don't know, I always felt like that was a big thing. Like, you know, who was the better smart genius science kid? I'm Team Dexter. Deal with it. But, you know, I still gladly support Jimmy Neutron. So, whatever. I guess everyone wins. Now, in terms of this being a movie lead into the show, again, it does well. It doesn't feel like it's literally just a pilot, which it pretty much was. What it is that the show was originally supposed to air on Nickelodeon because the creator, you know, went around a few places trying to get this done. I know the character was originally called like Johnny Quasar or something like that. It was changed to Jimmy Neutron just to make it more unique because I guess the head of Nickelodeon at the time thought it sounded a bit too much like Johnny Quest. And pretty much they were impressed with what they saw. So they were like, hey, you know, why don't we just do a movie and then we'll do the show just to kind of hype it up. And, you know, it could be cheaply done because we could use the same models between both versions, the show and the movie. And that's pretty noticeable. I mean, even though the movie itself does make changes to the characters that you don't see in the show, mainly like in clothing designs, like Jimmy wears shorts in the movie, in the cartoon he wears pants. Carl has his suspenders. Sheen, I think, has different colors on his shirt. I don't know. I know it's down to even the smallest things. I guess that's more of a copyright thing than it is a thing that they decided on for designs. I don't know. I'm not entirely sure. But for the most part, that's the general idea of how this came about. And again, it works. I've seen other movies that are lead-ins to show. And while I'm not saying that any of them are always guaranteed to be bad, you can kind of tell that they're made to be for shows. Like the Foster Home for Imaginary Friends. I mean, granted, their movie was on TV, but they had like a TV movie before the show, and it's pretty noticeable that it's a pilot for the show, even though I really like that one. The Star Wars Clone Wars cartoon, definitely one of the worst examples of a show that had a movie leading into a show, because yeah, that movie feels like 4 episodes just strung together. Like it's to a point where I'm like, yeah, I think we would have been softer on this had it actually premiered as a show, even though it still wouldn't have been a good pilot. But yeah, that was the general idea, and it worked. I know that they would eventually try this again with Barnyard, a movie that most people don't like, and to be fair, I don't know what's the general consensus going from the show to the movie. All I know is that one kind of felt a little bit more because they had more celebrity cast members, which that's not necessarily something that would make it bad, but it's one of those things where it's like, you know, if you're going to make this into a show, it's going to feel a little weird that you're promoting it with actors that are not going to be in the cartoon. But, you know, by that point, I guess they were like, we got to have celebrities to sell it. Or, I don't know. I don't know too much about that movie. I just know a bit of it, okay? But yeah, it's definitely a really successful TV show, movie pilot. It definitely has its charm, and, you know, being a nominee for Best Animated Film among the first ones, I get it. It is a cute movie, and it deserves to shine, and it's really worth watching, even though it's definitely the clear loser in that bunch, because it's the one that I'm like, yeah, I would knock it out first, if you were to ask me to rank these. But, you know, for what it's worth, it's still very clever. I honestly find myself more charmed than I expected, because going into this, I was like, I know there's some jokes that do work. I remember some of these jokes, like, you know, there's this bit where a kid, when they're all free from their parents, where pretty much one of the kids, when they're starting to realize that having no parents is bad, is pretty much like, oh yeah, I was in an eating contest and I won, and the camera pans back, revealing that he's like this really fat kid who, I guess, you know, ate so much that he got that fat. And I'm like, yeah, that's funny stuff. But it is one of those things where it's like, I don't know how well this will hold up. And thankfully, watching it holds up. It does work. It's, again, not the greatest one, but it is the one that, you know, I'm like, yeah, I get why this was nominated, and I get why, you know, people would want to revisit this. I get why some people would call it like a childhood classic. It is a very cute, well-made movie, and yeah, you know, it's not perfect. The music can be annoying. Some of the choices between the character personalities are not great. But for the most part, the story moves quick. The jokes come in, you know, nice and smooth. And, you know, you still get a lot of charm. So I really can't complain in any of that regard. The only thing I would really say is just, if it were me, I would have changed some of that stuff up. But, you know, that's all the stuff that I can't really control. The show, I believe, was mostly on par with what I saw with this, at least from what I remember of the show, because there are some clever jokes in the show, and there's some stuff that I'm like, not too great. But I will say that if there's one thing that the show definitely has over the movie, is that some of the episodes on the show really got creepy. Like, I know there was an episode with a dummy, I know there was an episode where Sheen becomes smart, and yeah, these are kind of horrific once you get down to the details of it, and it's honestly much scarier than I remember. Like, not to the point that I'm like full on pissing myself or anything, but to a point where it's like, this is kind of intense for a kid's show. But, you know, that's a whole other topic. As for Jimmy Neutron, the movie, fun time. If you enjoyed the show, of course you're going to enjoy the movie. If you never saw the show or the movie, give it a watch. You're bound to enjoy it. And obviously, if you weren't a fan of the show, you probably should just skip out on it. But either way, it's still a fairly well-made movie, and I do recommend it on that level. And it's definitely a masterclass in how well a good design choice could make your movie appealing, even when it has some of the least advanced graphics around. But that's neat, honestly. So with that, I just want to say thank you for listening. This has been Octaviano Macias, and I hope to see you again next time.
We need to ask ourselves, what would Ultralord do?
Thank you for coming on and listening to me today. If you enjoyed it, you can always subscribe to my YouTube channel. You can follow my podcast. It's on Podbean, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. And if you want to support me even more, there's always the option of Patreon. Patreon is a great way to support artists. And with that, you can always put in $1 or even more. It's all up to you. All just to help produce the show and other things I may do. Thank you again, and I hope to see you in the coming future.